welcome back to our third session of creating this drawstring bag. We're at the point now where we are going to construct our entire bag, but I want to give you a little bonus add-on. I had mentioned in the previous session that there is a more simple type block that you can do, or that does not have embroidery, for those of you that don't have embroidery machines, that you can add to it. So I just want to go through creating that and showing you how easy it is to just change up this entire project into any type of quilt block or embroidery design, whatever it is you'd like to do. So we're going to quickly construct this block. I already have my pieces cut, and you can find these same measurements on the website with all of the other measurements that we've been using. So I have I've got 5 total pieces for this front piece here. So we're just going to sew those together. And these don't have my little draw lines on them because I was over here pressing them and getting them all ready to go. So we're just going to, again, line our fabric up along the edge of the foot. So even if you happen to iron away your marking pen marks, you can still just easily do it with this piece. So I like to press these before I get one long piece. It's just a little bit easier. With these, I'm gonna press again. I know we talked about this in the last session, which way to press. Again, there's not a million, because there's only 2 ways you can press it, but there's different opinions on which ways you should go. I like to press mine towards the darker fabric so that you don't necessarily see the seam underneath on the lighter fabric. So we are gonna press this. Again, my little trick, whichever way I want the seam to be pressed, I'm gonna have that fabric on top. So I have my dark fabric, my red one on top here, and I want my seam to go towards it. So I have that on top, and then I flip that piece over and just press that down. So then my seam is pressed to the back side like that, to the darker side. And then we're gonna add on another square. And these are just alternating squares. You could do one long strip instead of little squares, but I like to break it up just a little bit, and I like to have lots of different fabric options. So if I can break something up into little pieces, what I like to do is I like to think about what my finished size is going to be, and then I will take that and I will break it down into smaller pieces, whether it's an entire quilt block or it's little pieces, and then the longer pieces. There's so many options you can do. You just sort of decide what the look is you want. So again, I press this towards the red side over there. So now both of my seams are going out that way. And it doesn't necessarily matter either for this, because the pieces I'm gonna have on the top and bottom is just one long strip. So before, when we did that other block, you want to be mindful of which way they go if your seams are going to intersect at any point, so that you can do that little sandwich, lining them up where they fall into each other the right way. But for this, it does not matter as much. So again, I want my seam to go towards my darker fabric, so I have that piece up, and then I'm going to just lift this up and press that seam out just like that. And again, I'm not forcing it, because then that can stretch my fabric. I'm just sort of placing it in place right there. And then one more piece here. So this finished size will be the exact same size as our other piece here. But again, the entire process of creating this drawstring bag is very universal. It just depends on what you want your final bag, the size and things like that to be. So just like that. So there we go. We have one long strip. Super quick and easy. Now we're going to take these blue pieces and put it on either side at the top and bottom. And I like to, again, this is a personal preference, I like to sew with this piece on top, so that I can make sure whichever way I'm sewing, my seams, whichever way I press them, they are going the right direction. So, and I line up that first corner. So you could do what I had mentioned in the previous session, where you take a pin and you put it into where all the seams are. Or if you have, again, this piece with your seams that go in different directions, if you have that piece on top. And again, I mentioned this with the pins, that whenever I get to a pin, I would stop and make sure that my fabric was still lined up. So that's what I'm doing. Every time I get to a seam, I'm going to sort of pause and make sure that the edge of my quilt block piece and then the edge of that blue piece are still continued to be lined up along the raw edge there. Otherwise, you're going to end up with strips that are sort of crooked, and then the entire piece doesn't go together seamlessly. So just like that. And then we're gonna press this. I find it easier to press away from where the seams are. So this long blue piece is, there's not any seams on it. So I press towards that. I wanted to mention also, in the previous one, I mentioned having lined fabric, that I love having gingham looking fabric, but to work with it and get the line straight, you have to cut the fabric on that line. And so with this type of fabric, this blue one here, it's more of at a diagonal. And so it's more forgiving. I don't have to cut it on the straight. It's at a diagonal and it looks really good. I didn't have to worry about if it was gonna be straight or not. So we're gonna take this next piece and do the same thing. I'm gonna flip over to this side and line up my corner there. If I can get it sticking, there we go. And then line it up with the edge of my presser foot. So the edge of my fabric, edge of my presser foot. And go along. And when I get to that seam, I'm just making sure everything is still lined up. And that my seam is sewing in the direction that I had pressed it, because I will show you the last thing you want is to sew this seam and then your seam on one side went the other direction and you have a little, sort of like a little hump in your seam from the front side. That's the last thing you want to see. So all the way through there. So let me show you what that would look like. If you are sewing and this seam right here goes down towards the middle, if I had sewed where that was actually back, then it sort of is flipped. This one's down, this one's back, and you have a little bit of a bunch right there, and that's not what you want. You want to have those flat, finished seams. And I'm going to press this in the same direction that I did the bottom one. I just like consistency. And there we go. And then there is part of our first one. So now we're going to add 2 more pieces to it just to make it a little bit bigger to fit at the top. And again, you could change this up. You could do, so for this one, it's very universal and it's all the same. This one I did a little bit different. So the bottom has red, the top has the white. I could have switched them. I could have done something different, but I knew I wanted red up here and I didn't want that much red flowing together. So I changed it up. You could do one long blue piece here and you could add decorative stitching on it. If you just have a normal sewing machine, and there are so many different decorative stitches on most machines, you could add anything like that to it. So this is going to be the easiest seam we do because we don't have any seams going either way. We just have 2 pieces of fabric with the edges lined up. So we don't have to worry about our seams going directionally. But what I will do is I will line my fabric up and I sort of put my hand in a position, and once I don't move that hand, you see my left hand's not moving. Once I get to a point where I know I didn't really pay attention to my seam, I will stop and then realign. So I sort of just, the distance that my hand moves is the distance I will sew before I just double check that everything's lined up and we're good to go. Just like that, and then we're gonna cut. So press this one. And again, this one doesn't necessarily matter, but I'm gonna go towards the red because I think it's just a little bit darker that way. And then we're gonna put this white piece at the bottom. And same thing, easiest seam we're gonna do because we don't have any seams. It's just the 2 pieces of fabric lined up. So again, what I did was I've lined up this area right here. Basically the area that my table space is in is the area that I sew in before I double check that everything's lined up. You don't want to keep going and not have checked that your edges are lined up because I can already tell it was too far over this way. So we just want to make sure all of that's lined up. And go all the way down. So, and there we go. That was quick and easy. And this is a 10 by 10 inch, 10 and a half by 10 and a half, because we still have our outside seams block that we did super quick and easy. So again, if you don't have an embroidery machine, feel free to make up the size that you would like, 10 inch finish by 10 inch. And you can just create anything and put any pieces together. You could do it scrappy. You could do more where you could add in more decorative stitching. So lots of options you have here. So what we're gonna do next is I'm gonna move my machine out of the way and we are gonna line up all of our pieces, and I'm gonna give you my I don't wanna call it a trick, but my little easy way of doing a drawstring bag where you don't have 2 pieces and you have to shove the lining in. We're gonna have one long piece and it's gonna go together seamlessly. So I'll see you back in a minute. So now what we're gonna do is we're going to construct the entire bag together. I wanted to move the machine out of the way so you could see the entire layout of how it is, because you have to imagine once it's all sewn together, how it's gonna fold together. So here's what our end goal is this entire bag, and we have this piece up here. So let me show you. I have my quilt block, which is the main piece here, and then I've got this piece, this top little border, I have that. And then if you go to the back, I have another top border that matches because those two are gonna be together. And what you could do a completely the same quilt block again without a monogram in it. So you have a front or a back, or you could just do a solid of one of the two that you like. And that's what I decided to do, just a solid piece here. So that's gonna be this one here. And then we need our two lining pieces. So that's gonna be these here. We are gonna sew these all together in one long strip to get our finished bag. So let me show you how we're gonna lay that out. You want to be mindful of the direction of your quilt block, especially if you have a monogram on it. If you don't have a monogram, it doesn't matter. It could go this way, it could go this way, it could go any way. But we want to imagine that the middle, or the bottom, I should say, the bottom of our bag right here is right here in the middle, and we're working our way out. So I'm going to take the back piece, which is this yellow piece, this back piece, and we're going to line those two guys up here because that is this seam on the underside right here. So that's gonna be our middle seam. Then what we're gonna do, we're gonna add that top border that I had mentioned. So I've got two of those pieces, and we're gonna line those two up here. So we have one long piece right here. Then what you're gonna do is you're gonna take your lining pieces. If you think about it, the lining piece and that top border piece touch right there. So we want those two to line up here. So we're gonna line up one here and one here. So if you had a directionally based fabric, you have to think these two right here, this is the top of our bag. It's gonna fold in on itself. So you wanna make sure whatever direction your fabric is going, they're facing each other. So this is the back side, and if it had a specific print on it or the same monogram, things like that, it would go this direction. They'd be facing each other. You want them to mirror each other when you lift it up. And then these are our two top pieces and the border. So what we're gonna do is we are going to sew all of these seams together. All of these measurements, again, for these other pieces can be found online on the site, but what I want you to take away from this also is that you can make this any size you want it to be, just depending on what size this is. So if you have your finished block, this is a 10.5 by 10.5 inch block, this piece here is gonna be 10.5 by 10.5. And then I want my top border to be the same. These are 4.5 by 10.5. Again, same distance this way, but they're a little bit shorter in that way. Then what I want you to think of is when you put all of these together. So if this is 4.5 and this is 10.5, we put that together, we lose 1/4 of an inch for our seam allowance. So that is, without the seam allowance, I'm gonna do math in my head here, that's 15 inches total. But if I take 1/2 inch away from that, or 1/4 inch, I should say, away from it, that's gonna be 14 3/4. But then there's one more seam you need to take into consideration, this bottom seam where they connect. So it's actually 14.5. So you want this piece, your lining piece, to be 14.5. No, it's gonna have 1/4 more because we're gonna have the seam. So 14 3/4 to line it all up. And then they will all fit together seamlessly, and we're gonna box the bottom as well. So ignore the measurements that I mentioned specifically for this, but just keep the mindset of everything has to line up to the same when it's finished. These two front pieces are gonna be the same, and whatever with the lining with that seam allowance is gonna be the same when you finish it. So that's my little trick for you to create this in any size that you would like to. They would be cute, smaller or bigger or whatever you would like. So what we're gonna do next is I'm gonna put my machine back up here, and we are gonna sew all of these strips together and put it together. I like to break these into little pieces. I don't want to have to try and sew my entire strip together like I showed you a moment ago in one full swoop. So I'm going to break it up into pieces. I'm going to do my front piece, which is the front with this piece, and then I'm going to do my back piece, and we're going to just slowly construct the entire thing together. So I want this piece to be at the top of my block. So we're going to put right sides together, and we're going to sew that seam all the way down. Line that up there. I could already tell I shifted a little bit, so I'm going to stop and realign. that. So this is our completed front piece right here. And I'm going to press this seam open. And again, it could go either way. I feel like the green and the pink, they're pretty much equal in their values. So press it that way. But what I do want you to keep in mind is whichever way you pressed it on this one needs to be the same for the back piece, because these seams are going to line up again. So we want to be mindful of that. So next, what I'm going to do, I'm going to do my back piece of my bag. So this strip and then the bigger piece here. So again, so I'm not getting confused and I'm making sure things are going in the right direction. So we're going to line this up along the top here. And sew this down. And realign here. Just like that. Now that we have our back piece done, we want to make sure that our seams are going in opposite directions so that when they meet, when we do the side seam, they're going to do that little sandwich piece together like I had mentioned. So for this front piece, I had pushed the seam down towards the green. For this one, I'm actually going to push it up towards this floral part up here. So I want it going towards the floral part. I've got that floral part up, and I'm going to open it and press it that way. And it'll all make sense once we start putting the entire piece together. You'll see that it makes those seams going in opposite directions just fall into place just a little bit easier. So there we go. So we have our front and our back piece now. So remember, we had those laid down and we want to put those seams together. If this was directionally based, we want to make sure that it's going the right direction it's supposed to. If your back piece has directionally based fabric, or you decide to do another monogram on the back side as well. So we want the bottom pieces to line up together. So I have my two bottom pieces. I'm going to put them together. And I'm just doing this seam at the bottom, not the top one, because we're going to add in our lining to that top piece. So let's get these lined up here. Stop about halfway, get everything lined up again, keep going. And this seam that we're gonna press open is completely up to you. It can go either way. You could press it open, so it's completely up to you. I'm probably just gonna press it down because the one above it is going down as well, and it'll just probably flow better that way. But there's no rhyme or reason to this seam. It's the bottom of the bag, and we're gonna box the corners, so it'll be all right. There we go, so like that. So here is our front and our back pieces together. So if you imagine now, we're putting this together, here's our bag, and it's coming together. So now we need to add the lining pieces, and those are gonna go one to each of the top and the bottom here. So I've got those bigger lining pieces, and again, if they're directionally based, you wanna think, whenever this is finished, they're gonna be inward, so you need to be mindful that the top, if there's a top to your fabric, the top is here, and that lines up with the top of the floral piece there. So just be mindful of that too. And sometimes what I'll do is I will sort of put it together if I were to do my seam, I'll put it together a certain way and then flip it over to just see that it's going the right way. And if not, then I'll flip it the other way, and it's just a good way of double checking before you do that seam. And this is where, if you don't have an extension table, it is super helpful to have all of this space to be able to just have it hang off over on the side versus just right here at the edge. So definitely look into having that extra space. So there's one like that. We're getting there. We're almost there. And then we've got one more we're going to do here at the top. So line these right sides together and one more seam there. Like that. One more here. And we are almost there. Just like that. We're gonna cut. So there we go. What I had showed a moment ago, one long piece, that's what we've got here. Here's our entire bag, and we're gonna put it all together. It's gonna come together, and you're gonna be like, wow. So now what we're gonna do, we are gonna fold this in half like we were if we were putting it together. So that bottom seam where my back piece, and actually you see I'm already doing it wrong. I've got my green here, that actually goes to my front piece. And you would have quickly figured that out, because if I would have, let me show you, I'll show you my mistake and then how I would have figured out before I sewed it. So if you look here, if I left this with the bottom piece down, these little borders that I had, they don't line up now. So I want to make sure that these line up completely here. If you see here, they don't line up because I've got that extra little bit that actually goes to my front piece. So if I make this seam my bottom and I line that back up down here, now you will see that those two edges, they line up completely now. My front and my top little border I have there. So what we're gonna do first is I'm going to line up these seams just like I did before with my quilt block, sort of sandwich them in together, and that's why we did them in opposite directions. It sort of takes thinking how that finished process is gonna be to know which way to go, but I've made a few of these now, so I sort of have it in my head which way they're going. So I'm going to pin on both sides all of those seams together. And what we're gonna do, we're gonna sew up, and you know which seams I didn't press now that I'm looking at these. I did not press the borders to the lining ones, so we're gonna do that really quick. I'm gonna press those again in opposite directions so that they line up. So this one's gonna go this way. Y'all were all probably screaming at me at home saying, she didn't press that one, she's gonna come back around. So I caught it before we got to it. So that one goes up that way, and this one's gonna go this way. Need to have this one down. Let's just take these pins out. It'll be easier to work with. And this is why I mentioned on my other one, I like to do my seams as I go. When I was doing that block at the beginning of this session with the blue and or with the white and the red, is because it's somewhat difficult to deal with all of this fabric at once. So if you can press all of these seams as you go, it just makes it just a little bit easier when you get there. So let's start that again. We're going to find our bottom and then find those seams. So here's my first one right here with that top border that I have. And we're gonna line those up right like that, sandwich those together. Again, going through one side and then the other. And then the next one, and now you notice this is the one that I didn't press that I just showed you a minute ago. They're going in opposite directions, so they just sandwich easily together. And then we're gonna do the same thing for the other side. Those are the only two spots where you have two seams going together like this. So those are the ones I like to make sure that I've got them in place, because those are the ones you're gonna see when you finish. So let's do that. And you can, because this is such a big, the lining is a lot to work with, you can definitely do a couple pins in there to help keep it all into place. But what I like to do, we're gonna leave an opening on the bottom of this to flip the bag. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put a pin. We wanna leave about a 3-inch opening. So I'm gonna put a pin in each place so that I know when I come back around to that. And what I'm actually gonna do, this is my little tip that I do at home. I've been using all of these same pins. I'm gonna use a different pin so that I know, hey, that's different, I need to stop there. Versus if I put these same little bird pins all the way around, they're all just gonna blend together eventually. But I know if I come to something different, I need to stop. So there's my little opening where we're gonna flip it at. And again, you could just put pins all the way around it. So here's what you should have finished, ready to go. There's one more step we're gonna do. I'm gonna move my machine out of the way so you can get a better look. We need to add in another stop where our drawstring is gonna go. So we're not gonna cut this open. I know sometimes with drawstring bags, you can just go back in there and sort of cut a couple of those stitches out. We're not gonna do that. We're gonna plan for it. And there's a couple different ways you can do it. I did it 2 different ways on these bags I wanted to show you. So with one of them, this one's a little bit higher. You see how there's not as much little ruffle fluff up here? There's more down here. So when I did that, I had made this little casing where my straps go higher on the piece. But if you look at this one, it's a little bit lower. And I personally like this look better. I think it looks, I don't know, it just looks a little bit more fluffy. I like ruffles. If you can't tell, it's sort of my little thing. I enjoy them. So I like a big little ruffle here at the top. So with this one, we did our piece, our start and stop a little bit lower. And I'm going to show you that on this piece, but I wanted you to have a reference of what that meant with different ways you could do it. So it could be taller, and this gives you more space or more of a look. So completely up to you what you do. So we're going to move this machine out of the way, and I'm going to show you how to find your lines and then get them evenly placed on each side. All right, what we're going to do now, I've moved my machine out of the way, and we're going to do our start and stop lines for where our opening of our drawstring is going to go. And again, I mentioned that if you could go lower, you could go higher, wherever you want, but you want to make sure the same start and stop is in the same place. So if you think about it, looking at this is going to be my top seam here because this is my lining, it's going to go in there. So if you want more of this type of look where it's not as much of a ruffle, we're going to do our little opening up here. But if you want this one where you have more of a ruffle, we're going to do it a little bit lower down. And that's the way I like, so that's the one I'm going to do for this one. But you want to make them the same all the way around. I like to do them at least an inch from the fabric. So I'm not necessarily from my seam, I'm from the edge of the fabric. So it's going to be 3/4 of an inch up when we're finished. So I've done my first line, and it's again about an inch from the bottom of my fabric, and then I'm going to scoot it over and go about an inch over from there. But what you want to be mindful of is your twill tape or your ribbon, whatever it is you're going to use for your strapping, you just want to make sure it's at least that width. So this is about 3/4 of an inch here, but I'm going to go a little bit more. You don't want it to be tight, so you want to give at least 1/4 of an inch extra. So I'm just doing a 1 inch opening right here. I've got that here. I want to do those same markings on the other side. So I'm going to go an inch up from the bottom of my fabric, not necessarily my seam, and then an inch up from that seam right there. This is going to give the look of this fuller ruffle versus the little shorter one here. It's completely up to you. So we are going to start and stop at those seams as well. And again, they're marked, so I know that I need to start and stop there, where these I don't necessarily, you could do marks here where our pins are, but different pins. So different ways of doing that. So I'm going to move my machine closer, and we are going to sew these together. Now what we're going to do is we are going to sew around our entire bag except in those 3 spots that we had marked. So our little opening here, our opening to flip it at the bottom, and then this other side one where our twill tape is going to go. So we're going to start at the bottom. I just like to start on one side and just work my way all the way around. I'm not going to start at the lining of the bag and go around. I just want to start in the same spot and end. So again, I'm just doing a 1/4 inch seam. And again, we're going to make sure that our pieces are lined up, our edges are lined up, all the way down. And this seam goes up, so I want to make sure he stays that way. And then I'm getting to this. Do you see this right here, how it sort of is flipping up? We want to avoid that. So I'm going to put my needle down. I'm going to raise my presser foot up and just push that guy down. And I'm going to pull my pin out, and we're going to keep going. But if you notice, I'm coming up to one of those lines that I drew. So I'm going to come up to that and stop, and then we're going to reverse, and we're going to go back stitch a little bit and then back forward. And that's going to lock it into place, because we're going to put a little bit, I don't want to call it strain, but we're going to put a little bit of strain when we're winding our twill tape in there. We don't want those seams to come out. So that little back stitch locks it in for us. So then I just moved up, and we're going to start at the next line right here and just keep going. So I skipped that inch. We're going to go forward and back a couple stitches and then just keep going. Coming up to that seam. Making sure our fabric is all lined up here, our edges are. Just like that. And we're going to come down to this corner, and we're going to stop about 1/4 of an inch down. And have you ever noticed you have those lines on your 1/4 inch piecing feet? Those lines, they mean something, those measurements. There's one line right here. I'm not sure if you can tell. We want to get to that line, and then we can pivot it. But we don't want to pivot it until our needle is in the down position. If we raise that presser foot up, we're going to lose our spot. So I'm going to put my needle down, and then I can raise my presser foot up, rotate it, And my fabric is lined up right with the edge of the foot again. So I didn't have to worry about going too far or not enough. Those lines on the presser feet, they do mean something. So I came up to that pin that was different than all my others. So I'm gonna come a little bit further and then I'm gonna reverse and go forward again. That's gonna lock that in, and then we're gonna cut and we're gonna move down about 3 inches and start again. So let's get this lined up here. And so the same thing we did on the other side, we're gonna finish up our bag and do on this side. So let's lower that there, get this lined up, it's shifted on me. Go forward a little bit, reverse, and then back forward. And again, we're coming up to that corner, so we're gonna come to that, oh, I went too far, I was going too fast. So that's all right, we're just gonna back up a little bit because we're gonna end up cutting those little corners off anyway because we're gonna box our bag. But we're gonna stop with our needle down, raise our presser foot up, turn our fabric, make sure we're lined up, and then keep sewing. All the way down. We're gonna come up to that seam. And this one goes down, so we just wanna make sure it's gonna stay down. So when I get to them, I just go a little bit slower. And then we're gonna come up to our line where we're gonna put our twill tape. So we're gonna sew all the way up to there. And we're gonna stop, reverse, and go forward. Then cut that. And one more seam, and then we're almost there. But we're gonna do 2 things before we get to flipping it and seeing the finished bag here. Let me shift this over a little bit. There we go. Make sure those are still lined up there. Okay. Oh, we're gonna go back some too. Forgot about that. There we go. And then forward. There we go. Lined up. There we go. And we're gonna cut that. And there you have it. We have our bag, but we're almost there. We've got 2 more things we need to do before we flip it. So now we're gonna do boxed corners. I love doing boxed corners. They're one of my favorite things to make what seems like a thin bag look so much bigger. It gives you more space on the base of your bag. So what we're gonna do, I'm gonna move my machine out of the way and I'm gonna show you how to do your corners and then we'll go from there. All right, now we're gonna add our box corners. These are some of my favorite things to add to the bottom of bags. And so what you're gonna do is you're going to pull your front piece away from your back piece. And what you're gonna do, that same little sandwiched seam that I had been mentioning, we're gonna do that with this side seam and the back seam over here. So the side one right here, we're gonna line that up. This one here, and then along with the bottom there. So I'm going to pull these 2 pieces apart. And I want to make sure that my seams are going in different directions. So this top one is going to the right, and then my back one is going to the left, so that again, they sort of sandwich into place. You can do boxed corners a million different sizes that you want to. I'm going to do just 1 inch because this border that I have is only 1 inch finished, and I don't want it to go into my quilt block more. So if you have a quilt block, just be mindful of that. But I've pinned this in place, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my ruler and my Frixion, my little heat away pin or water soluble pin, and I'm going to line up the fabric, the corner right here, 1 inch down on my ruler. And then I'm just going to mark a line all the way across. And that's the line I'm gonna sew on, and that's gonna give me my box corner. So just like that. So I'm gonna do this on all 4 of my corners, and then we will come back and we're gonna sew them together. Once you have all 4 corners pinned and marked 1 inch up, we're just gonna sew a straight seam all the way across all of them. So again, just making sure that your boxed corner is flat and out. You don't wanna have any of that bunched up underneath, because then it's gonna give like a seam look in your material. So like if you see right here, this is folded up right here. We don't want that. We wanna make sure that that's smooth on the back and the front right there when we sew our seam. So, and we're just gonna sew straight across that line. And I'm gonna do that to all 4 corners here. We can take our pin out as we go. Move him out of the way. And 2 more. And then we are almost there. Get this all flat here. This is where, again, you're just making sure that your seams are sandwiched together so that they meet up. That side seam and that bottom seam will meet up on the outside of your bag. You won't necessarily notice it, but to me, it's just an aesthetic look, and I just want to make sure that all of my seams line up and it all looks like one seamless bag together. There we go. So we're going to cut that, and then we can clip these corners off. But before I do that, I want to show you another little trick tip that I have. So you have this opening where we're going to flip our bag here in a minute. When you get done flipping that, sometimes it can be a little bit cumbersome to get that fabric to lay at the right angle and things like that. So before you flip it, what we're going to do is I'm going to take my scissors and I'm going to cut. You're going to see my finished seam right here. I'm going to cut right at the end of that, but not actually hit my seams. So I've got that little bit of opening right there, and I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Just like that. Get it all? And then what we're going to do is we're going to press those out how they would look from when you did it on the inside. So we want them wrong sides together, like this. And then we're going to press. So let me, didn't cut my piece long enough there. Just like that. And then it's already giving us like a baseline for where those need to be when we flip our bag, because we're going to sew this closed and we want those out of the way. So flip into the other side here. We're just going to do a little bitty seam when we get this, and this just made it so much easier to be able to work with this on the right side of it than having to flip it. So there we go. And we are going to go ahead and flip this. We're going to take it all through the bottom piece there. And this is the fun part. This is the exciting part. We get to see our almost finished bag and what it looks like. We're getting there. And I like to also make sure my corners are pushed out. So I wanted to show you this. Remember I mentioned making sure that that side seam and that bottom seam line up. So right here, it seamlessly lines up and they're not offset. And that's what helps when you have those seams going in opposite directions and you flip them into place. So let's pull this main part out and do the same thing. I'm going to put my hand in here and push out my corners before I get going. I may have not left a big enough hole for my hand to fit through. That was a little tight. And that's again why you do those back stitches, so that when you are flipping it, sometimes you can put a little bit of strain on it, pushing out the inside and the out, the lining and the main piece, and you want to keep those from those stitches from popping on you. So here's the other one of the other corners here, and you can see that I've got them lined up. I lined up those two seams and they line up really well there. So now that I've done that, I'm going to pull my hand out of here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to, well, first we need to sew this seam closed. We don't need a hole in our bag. I don't need my money getting lost in the bottom of my bag, because I guarantee you one of my children will find it. So we are going to line this up, and we're just doing a really small, like 1/8 of an inch, 1/16 of an inch, like just really right along the edge right there. Because again, the piece that we had that we folded under there is so tiny. But look at this. I didn't have to do anything to get this. It is already all pressed and ready to go for me. I didn't have to sit here and like shift it and get it all pushed in there. It's already all ready to go for me to sew closed. So I learned that a while back. Just doing that ahead of time before you flipped it makes a huge difference and makes it a lot easier to get that good, clean finish seam. All right, now what we're gonna do is we're going to take this lining piece and push it into the inside of our outer pieces, just like this. We're gonna push in our corners, make sure they sort of meet together down there. And we're gonna line this up here. And we can press this seam so that it's straight. But here you go, look, we have our bag, y'all. We are almost done. We just have to put our little twill in it and you have a finished drawstring bag. So let's press these just because I like to have good clean finished seams. So we're just gonna go all the way around here, making sure that these are held in place because I don't want my lining to come up above my outer piece and vice versa. Good clean finish. You've worked this hard to get this bag, which I don't think was very difficult. Hopefully you feel the same way, but we want to have it finished and clean good. Just like that. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to take our extension table off and we're going to have our free arm and we are going to sew. We want to have like a casing for that twill tape to go around. You will see right here, here's my little opening, my little 1-inch opening that I had. This is where our twill tape is going to go, is in here. I want to have a seam above that and below it. So we're just going to do a straight stitch seam all the way around. But to do that and make it a little bit easier, we're going to take our extension table off and have our free arm over here. So I like to start on a side seam or the back where you're not necessarily going to see where you start and stop. But you want to find a guide, a place on the machine where you can guide the edge of your fabric around the entire way. So sometimes if we did our opening closer to the top, we could find those measurements on our stitch plate. But for this one, we're a little bit lower. So I'm just gonna find a reference point for my machine. And I have a little marking over here that I'm gonna just make sure I'm lined up with all the way around. So there's my opening. I wanna start right there. And again, I like to start in that seam so that you really don't see where the two stitches meet at the end and the beginning. So here we go. And we're just gonna sew all the way around. Again, we wanna make sure that this piece right here that we press, this is another reason why we press it, so that it's not gonna shift and we're even. We don't want a bunch of our lining to be within this piece and be all bubbly. And you see with the free arm, you can just easily flip this around and just keep going. And I'm coming up here to my other opening right here. Right there. And you could do a decorative stitch on this. If you didn't have a print like I have here, you could do a running stitch. You could do a decorative stitch, add something extra to the top of the bag that would be super cute as well. And so we're gonna be coming back around here. And I lined right back up where my stitches started. And then we're just gonna shift. So I did this as the bottom of the opening. Now we're gonna shift and do the top. So let me figure out where that starts and ends right there. Okay. Now we're just gonna go all the way back around. You see how once you get going, you can just get into flow. As long as you just have that reference point and line this up with something or, you know, somewhere on this side, you can get it all the way around. Here's my side seam. And the reason I'm sort of slowing down here is because there's a little bit of bulk with my two seams, and I just want to make sure that they're not gonna push me out of the way and not have that straight seam. You could do also a different color thread. I just used a white to blend in, but you could use a pretty green to match it or a yellow, then along with that decorative stitch, and it would really stand out and look really pretty. So there we go. I'm back around to the beginning there. And then what I'm gonna do, there we go. There we have it. Now we're going to feed our twill tape through this. So there's two different pieces here we're gonna do. I have two pieces of twill tape. They're 32 inches each. We're gonna have one go in one way and come out the same way it came in. Then we're gonna have another one go in the other side and come back out the same way it came out. So I'm gonna get my straight pin. You can use a straight pin, you can use a double eye needle, anything like that really, just something to hold the end of your twill tape in place so that you can feed it all the way around like that. Make sure you close that. You don't wanna stab yourself as you're going through there. And then I'm just gonna feed this in and we're gonna go all the way around. And I sort of shuffle it a little bit like this. So I push a little bit and then I pull this way and just keep going all the way around. When you get back to that side seam, you wanna make sure you don't come out of the opening. So we're just gonna keep going. There's my side seam right here. We're just gonna keep going to make sure it stays in there and all the way back around to the front. We're getting there. Just like this. Once I get back around to the front, we want it to come back out that opening just like that right there. And then we're gonna pull. And when I was going around, I was trying to be mindful that my twill tape was not turning on me so that it's smooth all the way around. But I wanna have an even tail, so I'm gonna pull a little bit more there. See if I can get this to shift some. So that my ends are closer to meeting so that I can tie a little knot and keep them together. So we're gonna take our straight pin out, line those up, gather them, and we're just gonna tie them into a little knot. Just like this. There we go, and that's one side. And you could leave it at this right here. I know sometimes people will just do one string. I kind of like the look of two and then just being able to pull both of them together. So let's do that other one real quick, just so you have an idea of how it's gonna go through. Same thing, we're gonna put our straight pin on our twill tape, but we're gonna go in the opening that we have not gone through yet. So it's gonna be this other side over here. And I don't think it matters if you go in the front or the back first. It's all gonna come back around anyway. But what I am being mindful of again is that my twill tape is straight and it's not twisted on me, because once you get it back around and you tie that knot, you'll feel that little bit of a bulge there, and that's not what you want. So if you look right here, I wanted to show you something. When you come back around for that second one, it should not come out right here. So what we're gonna do, we need to actually go behind this twill tape. So we're gonna push our pin back in, and I'm gonna move it behind. So now I can just keep feeding it. So you wanna make sure you go in the same way that or come out the same way that you went in. So we're gonna keep pushing this safety pin. I just realized that I have been saying straight pin this entire time, and y'all are probably, again, shaking your head at me at home because you're like, why would we use a straight pin? We're gonna stab ourselves as we're going around. Your safety pin that we closed, and I know I mentioned that at the beginning to make sure that you closed it so that you didn't poke yourself. So there we go. We've got our two ends here, and we are going to just meet up our edges, and we're gonna tie another knot in this side so we don't come out. Just like that. And you could clip off the ends and make them a little bit more even too. But here's our little bag, and if we pull it together, there we go. And look, it's got that bigger ruffle at the top, and again, I like my little ruffles, so there you go. Lots of different options that you can do to finish out your bag. I hope you enjoyed this and you are inspired to want to make your own drawstring bags in whatever size or design, embroidery or not that you have. So I hope you enjoyed this. Thank you.
Meredith, that was so much fun. It was a great sew-along.
Yeah, I had a great time, and I'm so appreciative to Classic Sewing for allowing us to be here to create this 3-part series for you. I hope that you enjoyed it and were inspired to want to make your own in different ways.
And the bags, they're so cute. You can do so many different things with different embroidery, different sizes.
Different holidays, Mother's Day, graduation, and you can change it up completely to what you need.
Yeah, and even like changing the colors, it could be for fall, right?
Yep, definitely.
That's wonderful.
Yes.
Really, really fun. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you next time.